So this is Jessica Donahue.
Hello, and thank you for having us here today. I want to just say maybe up front that it has been a very gratifying relationship to be working with CalSTRS over these years, and with the investment office, Deborah and April in particular, and the KPMG team. We thought that this process was very rigorous, and we learned a great deal from the process as well. To the point of whether or not these controls will benefit our other performance and analytics or other clients, the answer is yes in many cases. The first, I think, major issue that was on your report around change management, this is something that we had concerns about because of the manual nature at times and the specific nature of what these changes can be. We actually rolled out an automation tool to help us with change management at the end of last year. We implemented that for CalSTRS over the early months of this year, and we expect to see a lot of, great improvements around those change management capabilities because of that automation. That was rolled out for all of our clients. So that would be an example. But every one of these, the items that are listed in terms of manual processes, validations and checks of those manual changes are things that, yes, we look to whenever we learn or see an opportunity for improvement, we absolutely would use that across all of our clients.
Thank you very much. Joy.
Thank you, and thank you for coming here today. So I just want to kind of understand this process. I mean, we've looked at, or the audit was looking at internal controls that are in place at State Street and identified some weaknesses or deficiencies that need to be addressed or strengthened. Does any of this also mean that we need to look at sort of the data that was produced in these functions that had the weak internal controls?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I'll try to address that, but maybe the investment office may want to as well. But I think that when we went over the specific issues, they were not really surprises to our investment office because you want me to I'll just let April go ahead and address the issue. Then she can probably speak for the office better.
April Wilcox, Director of Operations. So I managed the relationship and the contract for State Street. And so Larry was right. Nothing here was a surprise because we do have our internal controls in investment operations and throughout the whole branch. So everything that KPMG has identified, we have already knew about and identified through our controls. It was mostly the point that that it came to our attention and our fact that we had to identify that first.
But I think the importance of this audit, though, is we want to prevent that, from having to rely on these detective controls in the investment office, right? We want our custodian to process it accurately, the first time, and not have to necessarily. I think those are good checks and balances, and it's great that we did recognize those changes. And so when there was I think one issue identified in there with regards to how a portfolio is consolidated in aggregate and it rolls up to a higher level, that was identified, so that it didn't really impact any performance reporting or, at the portfolio level or the fund level.
Yeah, you should be comfortable with the numbers that have been reported to you.
Okay, and that's because in addition to whatever controls we expect to have in place at State Street, we also have a set of internal controls that we use internally.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, but I think, Larry, your point is that going forward, we shouldn't have to rely on those internal controls to identify issues with an external vendor.
Right. We don't want the investment office to relax their controls or anything like that, right? It's great that we have those detective controls in place, but that shouldn't be our only reliance, right? We want the controls up front to be able to prevent any issues or problems.
Before it even gets
right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Deborah, have you moved up closer because you want to add something?
I do, thanks. Two points. We have been managing this risk with the custodian for quite some time, and as April mentioned, this is no surprise to us. We actually initiated this audit. Larry did mention that we've had a audit just on CalSTRS accounts. That is something that is in our contract, that State Street has been auditing our several accounts and providing a report. We wanted something more comprehensive. So April actually reached out to Larry and initiated this contracted audit, which he hired KPMG. And these are the results. So I wanted to let you know we've been managing this. Yes, we expect our custodian to have accurate information. That's what we pay them for. But we trust, but we verify. And that's what you're hearing April talking about with our internal controls at CalSTRS. We've had many discussions, April and I, with senior management, including Jessica, all the way up to their CEO. So I wanted to let you have assurance that we're managing this risk and we're setting the expectation, and we will be doing follow-ups. They have created a plan to address all of these items. We will be very conscientious to see if that plan is effective, and we will be having constant conversations with them.
Great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No.
Anybody else with questions? Okay, great. Cheryl, back to you.
So at this point, Crow did complete the other pension information and other post-employment benefits information audit, and I'd like to invite them up to share their results with the committee.
We're back. How's everybody doing? Doing well? We're doing great. So probably many of you remember that CalSTRS has engaged Crow to perform additional audits. Those audits really are necessitated by a couple of particular accounting principles and accounting standards, specifically GASB 68 and GASB 75. What those standards did is it really changed the way in which the liabilities associated with benefits in pension plans for 68 and other post-employment benefit plans in 75 needed to be recorded. So one of the things that CalSTRS did several years ago as it related to 68 is they came up with a mechanism to provide additional information to the employers and the non-employer contributing entity to allow them, as well as their auditors, to gain some assurance over some information to allow them to comply with those standards. When GASB 75 came out, they did the same thing as it related to the Medicare premium payment program. So Crow is actually hired to perform these services under the same accounting or same auditing standards as we do the financial statement audit. So generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. So that does require us to issue opinions to you. In addition to that, it also requires that we provide to you communications to those charged with governance, as well as the reports on internal controls. So this is going to feel a little bit similar to what you've already heard. What you're going to find is that all of the amounts that we're going to speak to are really interrelated. So I'll do some compare and contrasting with the information, the basic financial statement audit, and what's different about these particular items. In addition to that, again, one item I want to highlight, this restriction of use paragraph. This appears in both opinions, the opinion that's over the other pension information, which is related to the state teacher's retirement plan or the STRIP, as well as the opinion that's over the other post-employment benefit information related to the Medicare premium payment program. Simply what this does is it says that this is a limited use report. It's very specific to the users of these financial statements and should not be used or relied upon by others. So that is something that's different when you look at the opinions for this information compared to the basic financial statements. So to talk a little bit about the scope of our services, and I think Julie did a nice job of teeing this up a little bit when she was talking in the previous presentation. So this is the state teachers retirement plan, and specifically, this is a schedule of proportionate share of contributions for employers and non-employer contributing entities. So you might recall Julie mentioned that in this particular schedule, you have all the contributing entities and you have the state. We issue an opinion on this schedule as a whole. What that means is we do not provide assurance at each individual employer level or the percentage of proportionate share that's listed on the right-hand column. But what we do is we perform sufficient procedures relative to the schedule as a whole. In addition to that, on ARM page 168, you have a schedule of aggregate pension amounts. In that particular schedule, if you look at it, there are a number of different items that are captured. There are roll forwards of information and a number of numbers, and a lot of numbers that are presented on that particular schedule. We are actually issuing separate and distinct opinions on these three amounts only. The total net pension liability as of June 30th, 2018. You'll see on that schedule that the net pension liability as of June 30th, 2017 is also presented in our opinion in the previous year. Covers that, and then the total deferred outflows of resources and total deferred inflows of resources. So in a single auditor's report, we're actually issuing 4 different opinions: the scheduled proportionate share and the 3 amounts that are noted on this particular slide. If you then go to ARM page 208, we're now looking at the other post-employment benefits information relative to the Medicare premium payment program. And because the state doesn't have an obligation relative to this program, this is the exact same schedule that you see on the previous pages, except it excludes the state's contribution. By excluding the state's contribution in the right-hand column, the proportionate share of the total contributions on this schedule changes. So those would be the significant differences. So when Julie was talking earlier about the level of precision of our management's internal controls, just to compare and contrast our procedures compared to these schedules versus what we do for the basic financial statement audit, we're always going to audit to the lowest level of assurance, so the lowest level of materiality, if you will. So as we design our audit procedures over the contributions, we're going to make sure that those procedures are sufficient to allow us to issue an opinion on this particular schedule. And upon doing so, it also gives us sufficient audit evidence to issue the opinion on the schedule of proportionate share for the STRIP, as well as CalSTRS basic financial statements. On ARM page 209, this is where it reflects the total net OPEB liability of the Medicare premium payment program and also the total deferred outflows of resources and inflows of resources. So some of these amounts in particular is what previously led to a material weakness that, as stated earlier, has been sufficiently remediated by management.
Brenda, you might point out that on that slide, unlike anything else, that's actual numbers versus in millions.
Oh yeah, thank you, Kevin. I don't know if you could hear Kevin. So he just wanted me to point out that these are actual numbers and they've not been rounded to thousands or millions. So again, it gets back to the granularity and the small dollar amounts that we're dealing with to total deferred inflows of resources of just under 60,000. And then what this picture is intended to do, although I'm not sure it does it very well because it almost looks a little bit like a shadow, but when you think of CalSTRS basic financial statements and all of the different columns with the different programs, you will see that the STRIP is what makes up the most of CalSTRS. So, you know, in that particular situation, when we audit the basic financial statements, our responsibility is to the total column, if you will. So we're auditing CalSTRS as a whole. In this particular situation, when we look at the other pension information, specifically the net pension liability, we're doing that specifically just for the STRIP. And you can see that STRIP really represents CalSTRS as a whole. Now, when you get to the Medicare premium payment program, that program in and of itself is very insignificant to CalSTRS as a whole. But upon these auditing procedures, we do have to design our procedures, and management has to design their internal control structure so that upon issuing all of those schedules, the information is accurate and complete, and it's not materially misstated to a much lower level of materiality. So with that, Kevin and Jen are going to actually take you through the opinions the communications to those charged with governance, and the reports on internal controls, just really highlighting the differences between the basic financial statements compared to these schedules and amounts.
Great. As Brenda said, I'll just really try to highlight differences in the opinion on this schedule versus what I've already shared with you as it relates to the financial statements. First and foremost, that restriction of use that Brenda pointed out, and it's really intended to provide the employers and their auditors sufficient evidence to book those liabilities. Second key difference, the opinion upon the financial statements are really the financial statements taken as a whole. Never once do we say, and investments is exactly right, or cash, or accounts payable. It's the financial statements taken as a whole. Here, where it's where it's much more unique, is particularly as it relates to the total net pension liability, the total deferred outflows of resources, and the total deferred inflows of resources. We are actually opining upon that individual number. We did issue unmodified opinions in each case, and we carried forward one emphasis of matter. We don't believe that the investment emphasis of matter that we discussed on the financial statements carry forward to this schedule. However, since it's truly focused on the total pension liability, we have alerted the readers to the actuarial assumptions embedded within determining the total pension liability. Again, unmodified opinion, and we believe it will be sufficient for the users.
Thank you, Kevin. Starting on ARM page 217, we have our required communications to those charged with governance with regard to the other pension information. And again, just to highlight some of the differences here from what we presented earlier this morning, from a critical accounting policy perspective, we have identified the scheduled proportionate share of contributions to be a critical accounting policy where we look closely at the policies applied by management for consistency and really looking at the accrual process that's followed on a monthly, quarterly, and then annual basis. We also take a close look at the net pension liability calculations. As Brenda mentioned on Schedule B, that information is reported for the users of the financial statements. And here we're critically evaluating the actuarial assumptions that are being utilized to come up with that calculation. And then lastly, from a significant accounting policy standpoint, we look closely at the revenue recognition policies that are in place for the scheduled proportionate share over the other other pension information that is reported. Oh, I think one. Yep. Oh, one. There we go. We did not have any corrected or uncorrected misstatements to report to the committee with regard to, excuse me, I misspoke. We had no corrected misstatements to report with regard to the schedule, but we do have one uncorrected misstatement that we've reported to the committee in prior years. This was a matter that was identified in the June 2015 audit and really is impacting the deferred inflow and outflow calculations. And because of the amortization period for those items being over a 3 and 4 year period, this is just the continuance of the deferral of those amounts, and that will be going away in future years as those amounts are fully amortized. Again, very consistent with the prior presentation in that we have no other matters to report to the committee with regard to the other pension information. We do have a separate opinion with regard to internal controls over financial reporting that's included in the ARM materials at page 215. And similar to our discussion earlier today, the purpose of this opinion at the bottom of page 1 is really to confirm to the committee that there were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified through our audit procedures.
ARM 176 will take you to our auditor's report over other post-employment benefits, or the MP3. Similar to the OPI, we are issuing an opinion upon the schedule of proportionate share. As Brenda pointed out to you earlier, this is the same schedule minus the state of California. Again, we're going to be opining upon the net OPEB liability as well as the deferred outflows and the deferred inflows of resources. Similar to all previous messages, unmodified opinions were issued in each of those areas. Again, we brought forth one emphasis of matter, but as you read through that emphasis of matter, you will see that it differs from what has previously been reported within the financial statements as well as the OPI. It's related to, it's MP3 specific. This information is not called out at the CalSTRS financial statement level because, again, as Brenda showed with she referred to it as the MP3 looked like a shadow. It's immaterial to the strip as well as CalSTRS as a whole. But when we're looking at the $383 million or $382.8 million total OPEB liability, these are the key actuarial assumptions embedded within that amount. So again, just calling the reader's attention to it, but our opinions are not modified with respect to that matter.
And then our last required communication to you is with regard to the other post-employment benefit information. And again, very similar to what we've already covered. And also from a critical accounting policy and estimate standpoint, we are looking closely again at that schedule of proportionate share without the other contributing employer information included. Again, looking at the net OPEB liability calculation and the specific actuarial calculations, estimates, and assumptions that are utilized for that, and then focused also on the deferred inflow and outflow calculations, and then also looking at the consistency of the revenue recognition policies and the buildup of that schedule there. We do have, again, no corrected or uncorrected misstatements to report with regard to this schedule, and no other matters to report to the committee of significance. And then lastly, starting on page, excuse me, I lost my page here. Starting on page 223 in the ARM materials, we do have our report on internal controls over financial reporting with regard to this schedule, and again, confirming that we have no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified through our current year audit procedures. You will see that this opinion has a third page to it, a bit different than the other opinion that we just looked at. And this is a report of the status of the prior year finding. And in the 2017 audit, there was a material weakness reported, and we have the updated status here that this has been partially implemented as we discussed earlier this morning.
We'd entertain any questions if you haven't.
I don't see any questions. So, Bob, Larry, anything to add?
Just want to make sure the board, at this point, there's been like, a gazillion audit opinions, or it seems like, but, and that's okay because we're auditors. We have a great deal of opinions. Yeah, that's an accounting term, Paul. Yeah. Just want to bring back to these schedules really are not required by auditing standards. They really represent CalSTRS reaching out and trying to help the school districts grapple with these new accounting standards that came on that push down, that will require the districts to report their proportionate share of the liability on their financial statements. So you can imagine each auditor down at the school district trying to come up with what that number should be. That could be done individually, but gosh, what a waste of not a waste, but a vast accumulation of resources across the state of California to come up with these numbers. So management at STRS made a decision to sort of take this obligation on their own. But doing so and trying to get it right requires a lot of work, and it requires additional audit work and looking at inflows and outflows and looking at the balance. So those numbers need to be audited firm before you can actually start doing that proportionate share. So that's why these things are there. It's because really you're trying to do right by the school districts and provide them the information that they need to complete their financial statements.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It allows their auditors to rely on the financial information that's provided to them and audited by Crow, and so I think it's very helpful. And that way we don't have 1,000 different auditors approaching us.
In general, do the school district's auditors then accept these numbers and base their evaluation of the liability based on these numbers? They do. Great. Thanks. I don't see any other questions. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Crowe. We feel it's important for them to present their materials as they're the board's financial statement auditors, and thank you for your hard work this year, and we appreciate those long evenings that we spend on going over all of this.
Yeah,
So,
our
thanks.
pleasure. We appreciate it. Thanks.
Back to you, Larry.
Sure. The last few items have focused really on what we've accomplished to date in 2018. And the next couple of items will focus on going forward. And we've already started our planning for 2019 now. And to assist the organization in accomplishing its strategic goals and objectives, we perform an annual risk assessment for the purposes of developing a risk-based audit program and an audit plan. And to accomplish this, audits uses two different methods, one for employer audits and the other for internal audits. And so once again, I've invited Mike Dettell and Cheryl Dietz to discuss their processes and results with the committee.
Thank you, Larry. Audit Services Annual Risk Assessment is now presented in November instead of June due to Audit Services audit plan change from fiscal year to calendar year. For past risk assessments that covered fiscal audit plans, we analyzed the reported data through June of the previous school year. Due to the plan year change to calendar year, we are able to analyze the data through June of the current school year. This allows us to better evaluate and assess employers using the most current data available. For this year's risk assessment, we analyzed the reported payroll data during the last two fiscal years, which is a school year, ending June 2018, and ranked 1,749 employers using 11 predetermined risk factors. ARM 238 contains a list of the risk factors, their assigned values, and descriptions. For each risk factor, each employer received a weighted score up to 5 based on the factor's potential impact and actual number of known occurrences. For example, risk factor 5 is employers that reported high levels of one-time payments exceeding $1,500. The greater number of one-time payments reported by the employer, the higher the score that employer received for that risk factor. If the employer did not report any payments that met the one-time payment threshold, then the employer would receive a 0 for that risk factor. Table 1 on ARM 234 shows that 80 employers received a score for the one-time payment for risk factor 5. The scores of the 11 risk factors were totaled and applied to each employer. The employers were then divided into high, medium, and low risk categories based on their total score. Out of the 11 risk factors, 3 relate to large increases in compensation from one school year to the next school year, and 2 relate to high amounts of compensation within a single school year. Over the past 5 years, frequent audit findings were found related to special compensation and unused sick leave. Therefore, we plan to complete 50 limited scope reviews that specifically focus on those 2 areas. The risk assessment results will be utilized to select employers that have a greater likelihood of misreported special compensation and unused sick leave. For the special compensation reviews, we'll use the risk factors outlined on ARM 238 and select employers that were assessed as high risk under the 3 special compensation risk factors, which are risk factor 3, 5, and 10. And for the unused sick leave reviews, we will select employers that were assessed as high risk under the 2 unused sick leave risk factors, which are risk factors 6 and 9. In addition, we plan to complete 34 full scope audits. For the full scope audits, each employer will have the opportunity to be audited. Therefore, we plan to select 22 employers that were assessed as high risk, 8 that were assessed as medium risk, and 4 that were assessed as low risk to be audited. I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Well, I have a question. So basically what we're doing is based on the results of past full scope audits, we're shifting the emphasis. We're going to be doing fewer full scope audits and more limited scope audits.
That's correct.
And in total, we'll be actually auditing more districts, not by a lot, but we will be getting out and auditing more districts.
Right, and I anticipate probably the impact would be larger too, because we're specifically dialing in, let's say on the unused sick leave, we're just looking at employers that were assessed as high risk on those two items and maybe lower on the others. So they may not have been audited, or those sick leave findings would not even been found if we just limit it to full scope audits.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so just like this is the favorite time of year for the external auditors, this is our favorite time of year, doing risk assessment and internal audits. So what we do is we utilize inputs from our strategic plan, our enterprise risk management reports. We use historical audit information and some industry risk hotspots, along with input from management and executives. So we utilized our existing audit portfolio and work with management to determine whether there were any changes to that portfolio. And then we also worked with technology services as they performed their own risk assessment, and we incorporated those risks and activities into our overall risk assessment. We sorted our approximately 80 auditable activities and plotted them on a map by risk score. We took the top around 30, and as you can see on ARM 236, as they're plotted there, all those activities, we then can see on the right quadrant that we pretty much have coverage for 2019, ones we're proposing for 2019, as well as some that have been recently audited or in progress. So, and I know we have a lot of symbols there, so essentially we prioritize these activities based on risk and our audit resources. I believe the audit has adequate coverage to cover the high-risk areas. Those risks associated with investments are addressed through rotational audits, so through each asset class and investment program. As shown on ARM 237, 7 investment-related audits were performed in 2018, or will be completed in 2018, and we're proposing an additional 4. This will put each asset class and investment program on a rotation cycle of 4 years. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't see any.
Okay, good. And so the opportunity that this provides the committee with regards to our risk assessment is to, see, based on all of those inputs that were mentioned, areas that we would propose, including in our audit plan for this next year. And as Cheryl indicated, we're addressing those that are now identified in that high-risk quadrant. And we either have all of those in progress or will be included in our 2019 plan. But if the committee has any other areas of concern that we're not addressing, then I'd be interested in that input and appreciate that. But based on this risk assessment in item number 8, and as required by our professional standards for the practice of internal auditing, we have a plan that we're presenting to the committee at this time for approval for 2019. And this provides an overview of the mission of audit services. It also includes all of our proposed audits, as well as the allocation of our resources within audit services. And you can see that we're focusing really on governance areas and ensuring risk management areas, and then also ensuring that all of our primary business processes, controls are effective and operating as intended. And I'd like to just highlight a couple of areas within that plan. So we focused a little bit on the employer audits at this point and understanding the difference there. When we talk about a full scope audit, what that includes is we're really looking at, first of all, the census data, the completeness of data that's reported to us, the accuracy of the payroll data that's reported to us, as well as creditable compensation, as we discussed, which is creditable and non-creditable, sick leave, and then also we include post-retirement and any earnings with regards to post-retirement. The limited scope reviews, as we discussed, focuses on special compensation and unused sick leave. And we're gonna expand, as Paul was questioning earlier, we're going to expand the use, and we propose expanding from 20 to 50 of these limited scope audits, but we're also getting better at our data analytics, where last year we focused on just the one-time payments, and then we're going to expand now into other types of special compensation that is received, as well as sick leave for these audits that we're proposing in the 2019 plan. And then we want to continue to expand our capabilities using data analytics. And the plan also includes 16 proposed internal audits, and as illustrated on ARM 241, it shows the connection between these audits and the accomplishment of CalSTR's strategic goals and objectives. We're proposing 4 investment audits in real estate, private equity, risk mitigation strategy portfolios, and reviewing manager selection due diligence. We also continue to focus on the high risk within the organization of information security, and also information technology and their service management that they provide to the organization, such as release management, account provisioning, and patch management. And then we can continue to focus as well on the implementation of the pension solution, benefit administration, and controls over member data. And there's one area in the plan that I'd like to discuss with you as required by the standards, and that's on ARM page 244. Preserving auditor independence and objectivity is of the utmost importance for audit services and required by the standards. And the IIA recognizes that auditors are being asked to assume responsibilities for risk management and compliance activities, particularly in the development in the early stages of implementing new programs. And the professional standards provide us guidance on how to maintain independence of an audit program. And I've outlined for the committee on ARM 244 the safeguards that we've implemented within audit services in order to remain independent and objective. And the area that I need to make sure that the committee is aware of is that in the future, if that date does come and we have an audit of the compliance program, then the standards say that if an auditor has responsibilities for an area of management, that they, for a period of 1 year, cannot go back in and audit that same activity for which they were responsible, right? That maintains that independence and objectivity. And so if we get into that kind of a scenario, then it's likely that we'd have to have an external firm come in and conduct an audit of the compliance program if we still have responsibilities for that. And that will maintain that level of independence and objectivity for the committee to be provided assurance with regards to that audit. And so, our enterprise risk management program has been in place for a few years now. We are just conducting a review of that program. I imagine that when we get our compliance program, it'll probably be a couple of years, but when we get to that point, I'll make sure that we address it very carefully in order to maintain that independence and objectivity. Also, when we have our peer review, which is performed by an external firm, they'll look closely at this issue and making sure that we have appropriate safeguards in place in order to maintain independence. And I wanted to provide the committee assurance now that we've integrated compliance activities with audits that we are making sure those safeguards are in place and that the work going forward will continue to be independent and objective work. So I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that. Is there any questions on that particular issue? Okay. So you may have noticed that while we're performing more employer audits, there is less time allocated in the plan to performing the actual audits. And the section that says external audits is kind of our actual field work, if you will. And while we have the same resources that we're applying to these audits, those resources are distributed throughout the plan differently, right? And so we're able to use less resources, provide more audits, and then also more coverage with regards to our membership as a whole, of which we're auditing. And so I think that does demonstrate, as we talked about earlier, the benefit of those focused reviews. And, excuse me, we have distributed those hours throughout the plan. One thing that we have noticed is that as we're doing more audits, we have more appeals, for example. And so you'll see that there are hours dedicated to that activity and other areas throughout the plan. But there's also some other things that are associated with performing more audits, the administrative workload and so on and so forth. And so we do account for that, but we'll continue to monitor the use of these resources and how we apply it to the employer audit program and assess the extent of our coverage. And at this point, I'd like to answer any questions that you might have. And this is an action item for the committee to approve.
I don't see questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I do see a question. Lynn?
Thank you. You mentioned that you have more resources now dedicated toward appeals. Are those appeals from employer audits or internal audits?
Employer audits.
Okay.
Yeah, and that it requires us to participate in the process and sometimes even travel to the appeal and participate and serve as a witness. And some of our staff have to do that, and so it does take some additional time. And we expect that, and we've allocated time. We expect that we'll probably participate in. I think we have like 26 active appeals right now, and probably 6 of them this next year will be in in the administrative appeal process for the administrative law judge.
Are those only on full scope audits, or do you have appeals on limited scope audits as well?
The 6 that we're doing are on the full scope audits.
Right. Right now, they're in full scope. We're just completing the limited scope ones, but what's a common appeal is the one-time payment. So I expect more appeals on the one-time payment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate, Larry, your comments on the external audits and the hours. You and I discussed this a bit, and the idea that once we start doing more audits, there's going to be more need that doesn't show up in hours on external audits specifically in this plan, but following up and appeals and things like that. So, I think at least as one member of this committee, I just want to make sure that as we've figured out how to be more efficient with external audits, that we don't necessarily reduce the focus on external audits. We've increased it over the last few years, and I think to great benefit. So I want to make sure that it's understood, at least by this member of the committee, that reducing the directly allocated hours to external audits is not a suggestion that external audits are less important. They continue to be very important, but we're seeking ways to do it in as efficient a way as possible. And I commend the staff for doing that, for figuring out how to be more efficient with the limited scope audits.
Thank you. I just want to make sure one thing's clear, though, there, Paul, is that we do account for the hours within the plan. So we're managing over 48,000 hours in this plan. And so the appeal work is on ARM 247.
No, I understand that. It's
Yeah,
just
so
not,
it's just not within that section.
It's not right
audits,
there in, right, that's what I'm saying. So I understand that some of the hours that relate to the external audits are showing up elsewhere in the plan.
Correct.
Right.
Thank you.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are we ready then for a motion, or do you have any more to add? Okay, I don't see any questions. Can I?
I'll move to approve.
Okay. Move.
Second.
Second. The motion's been moved and seconded, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now to the Chief Auditor update. Larry?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of material today that are important for the direction of our program, and I just have one thing that I'd like to note here. One of our internal audit staff, Leah Escoto, achieved the designation of certified internal auditor by passing a rigorous 3-part exam, and it takes approximately 6 to 8 hours to do that. And this prestigious designation is issued by the Institute of Internal Audits, and we appreciate her dedication to the profession and thank Leah for for that. And unfortunately, she's not here today. But I wanted the committee to know that we're continuing our efforts to encourage staff to become certified, and Leah's done a great job here, and we appreciate her efforts, and it really raises the bar for our internal audit program. And I wanted the committee to know we're still focused on that area.
Yeah. Okay, so then the compliance director update. Dina? Oh, there. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. Dina Mount, Enterprise Compliance Director. As Larry mentioned, Enterprise Compliance Services was recently transferred within Audit Services. And this was to consolidate expertise and resources and provide consistent messaging to staff, management, and the board. This transition afforded us an opportunity to reevaluate our priorities. And we subsequently identified what we're calling the big three areas of focus for compliance efforts going forward. The first is an annual compliance risk assessment. We had been previously underway with that, and we decided that the amount of effort that would be needed to get the committee an answer more quickly about, what are we complying with and what are our top risks, we went out and got a vendor to assist us in that effort. So we're currently working with a vendor to identify CalSTR's compliance risk landscape. Based on the results of that risk assessment, we will be developing a risk mitigation strategy and focus for our efforts to work on those top 3 to 5 or so compliance risks that are identified through that risk assessment process. We anticipate providing a final report on that compliance risk assessment to the ARM Committee in March of 2019.
Before you go on, I just want to add one thing to that, is that, what we're doing is a co-sourcing effort here, and so it's providing training opportunity for our staff as well as the additional resources to accomplish the work. We have internally put together a tremendous volume of laws that pertain to us, not only as our benefit administration, but also through our investment operations as well, and provided those to the vendor, and we're working with them pretty closely on this risk assessment, and we have some full support of the executive team, and they've already started interviewing executive and management throughout the organization, and so we look forward to bringing back a very comprehensive review to the committee at the March meeting.
Thanks. Our second effort is to continue to develop and implement an enterprise-wide automated policy management system that meets best practices as per the federal sentencing guidelines. And the third effort is to establish a compliance reporting system that includes options for anonymous reporting of ethics and compliance concerns. We'll be issuing an RFP to get that third-party vendor within the next couple of weeks. In addition to activities outlined in Agenda Item 10, which is also ARM 250 through 52. Other program activities include recruitment of additional unit staff. We recently hired Elisa Franco back in September, and we have active recruitments for 2 additional staff to be brought on before the end of the year. Current staff, Elisa and Addison, will be attending the National Conference for Compliance and Ethics next week, along with Larry. And at the end of that process, they'll have an opportunity to take an exam to become certified compliance and ethics professionals. We've been in discussions with other public pension programs to elicit their lessons learned along their path in creating their compliance program. We've incorporated compliance messaging into onboarding for all new staff. Once our helpline vendor, did I talk about helpline vendor? Okay. Once our helpline vendor is selected, we will initiate a Speak Up program, a campaign to message to staff about the importance of speaking up, how to speak up, the anti-retaliation, and the various methods for them to either be able to call in anonymously or state their information, if they want a call back or follow up on their information. This furthers our efforts to prevent, detect, and respond to potential compliance issues or concerns. And we're recently been looking at the enacted legislation that could potentially impact CalSTRS, and to work with those business areas to either develop policies or procedures to address changes that may be needed as a result of the enacted legislation.
Right, and on ARM 252, we outline kind of the key initiatives and planned activities over the 3 months for the committee to see, and you can see that a lot of effort has been underway, but we're gonna wrap some of that up by completing that risk assessment, as well as making sure that we have a compliance plan in place for 2019 that the committee will have an opportunity to review, and then also rolling out our policy management function within the organization in the next couple of months here. And so those are our planned activities, and with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions. Bob, do you have anything? Actually, Joy, can I take Joy first, and then Chris?
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you for the update. I know there's a lot to go through and a lot to figure out how we prioritize. So I appreciated the update on sort of what you're doing to draw on a lot of the data and resources in the organization to really think about what our priority risks are and approach it in that way. And just look forward to getting the update and hitting some of the milestones in March. So thank you. Mm-hmm.
And Jacqueline?
I'm going to piggyback on what Joy said. Thank you all for this. This is I know, a big lift and a really thorough effort, and I really appreciated the way that the item was written. I feel like there's a really good balance of here's the detailed stuff that the committee needs to know about, but is also succinct, and I think there's clearly been a lot of thought put into this. And so I learn something every time you come and present about what you're doing for compliance, and so just wanted to thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dina, thanks for the report, and thank you for your willingness and the extent to which you've just thrown yourself into working with Larry and audit services.
That's the hard part.
That's the hard part, yeah. I just, just saying. But no, so Larry, thank you for taking this extra work on. It just, a year ago, this wasn't on your plate, and here it is. And Dina, thank you for your willingness to bring the compliance function within the audit function. That said, I think it is important to maintain some sort of independence between the two. And as you've heard, Larry brought up, and he pointed out some very specific things. You remember when he said, hey, here's what we're doing. And so it's important to know that audit services is thinking about how can we maintain, when necessary, an independence between an audit function and a compliance function. They do overlap a lot, but there does need to be some independent mechanism. And then, so for example, Larry couldn't audit. When compliance reaches the point where they're maybe up for an audit, it can't be audit services doing that. We're going to have to go outside. That's one example. Another example is just simply the Dina sitting up here. And I've been an advocate of that. I want to continue to be an advocate for that. Basically, just metaphorically, Dina has a chair at the table that she's able to come in front of the board and share results of what she does. And this provides her an avenue to address the board directly. I think that's important, and I hope the board continues with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Those comments, I think, were very, very helpful to the committee. And I want to echo what my fellow committee members have said about the great work that's been done and the great direction that things are now moving in, and appreciate all your work, Dina and Larry. And really, I'm eager to see the risk assessment results in March. I think that will be really helpful and obviously a real step forward in sort of now where do we go from here and what do we actually do to improve compliance within the organization. So it's great. Thank you for the update, and we look forward to hearing from you in March. Okay, review of information requests. Braden, were there any? Okay, that was simple. The draft agenda for the next committee meeting, item 12. Any questions, comments on that? Okay. Statements from the public. I don't see any. So thank you. We're adjourned then.